look like? Well, Dr. Rowan Burckhardt is the founder of the Sydney Couples Counselling Centre, and he's with us now. It's nice to see you.
Likewise, thank you.
Hey, times are pretty tough. There's a lot of financial stress at the moment. The pandemic seems to be dragging on forever. Couples are really feeling the pressure. Should they be going to couples counselling?
Personally, I think everyone should.
Before the problems hit,
Exactly,
right?
that's right. Yeah, because some people do leave it too late. And so if you can get in there early, when you're starting to have conflict that you're struggling to resolve, you will actually benefit a lot by doing that.
I feel like it should happen before the marriage.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
If you haven't done it before marriage, how can you resolve fights like that over well, I suppose finances, especially right now when cost of living is so expensive?
Yeah. Well, disagreements over finances, they're part of a broader category, which is about people needing to get their needs met from the relationship. For example, if you're someone who feels insecure if there's not enough of a buffer of savings and you see your partner spending a lot of money, then naturally that would make you anxious. And so your ability to be able to resolve that difference with your partner, because their position is in a sense equally valid. They might sort of have a more carefree approach and say, look, it'll work out. We don't always need to kind of plan for this terrible tomorrow. So it's not like one position is more correct than the other, but there needs to be an ability for each person to sort of say, hey, this is what I feel about this. This is what I'm struggling with, or this is what I need from you. And when both people can express that effectively, then you can sort of figure out how those pieces fit together. But what goes wrong is that people struggle to adequately express their feelings and hear their partner's feelings. And so both end up often in some kind of shouting match, or they just ignore the problem. And that obviously doesn't work.
So is that what you base your therapy on, that emotionally focused therapy?
Yeah, so...
What is that exactly?
Good question. So for a long time, they used behavioural approaches with couples. And there's a variety of different behavioural approaches. But essentially, the behavioural approaches were about instructing people on how to speak. This is what you should say. This is how you should say it. And it didn't really work so well. So when they started developing another approach, which is looking at helping people kind of get in touch with their feelings and to be able to connect with what's called primary emotions. So that's things like sadness, shame, and anxiety, and to be able to express themselves from that place, all the communication ended up sort of working a lot better, because those emotions, they draw the other person into you, as opposed to if you switch from, say, sadness into anger, that anger will trigger a kind of defensive response or reaction in your partner. So we help them get in touch with those primary emotions and to be able to then express themselves from that place.
Yeah, you say it's not always best to talk to friends about relationship problems. I don't, but why is that? Because it seems as though that's what a lot of people would do, and that's naturally where you would go. You go and tell your friends, you go and tell your family.
Yeah.
Why is that not a great idea?
Friends are probably always a little bit biased, in sense like if we were mates and you were telling me about what your girlfriend did wrong, my natural tendency would be to go, that's terrible. Doesn't she understand? Of course you need your time with mates and to go out drinking or whatever the case may be. So I'm not really an unbiased person. And I might sort of feel really affected by only hearing one side. So I'm not actually hearing about her experience. And so I'd naturally be influenced by the fact that I've only heard one side.
What's the most common problem you hear from couples and couples therapy? Because a lot of girlfriends are saying that they're really tired of carrying the emotional load in a relationship. So not just looking after the kids, but then also everything that comes with the kids. So birthday parties and making sure uniforms are sorted and all the extra stuff, making sure your husband's mother has a Christmas present, things like that. The stuff that, the little bits and pieces that kind of pile up. A lot of my friends are sick of that. How do you kind of bring a couple back together when something like that is causing issues? And how do you even get a bloke to listen to that?
Well, a lot of those things, they can fall into categories. So couples might fight over house chores, they might fight over how to raise the children, they might fight over finances, physical intimacy, spending time with friends. These are sort of the themes or topics. The number one, the one that probably is the most kind of presented in terms of when they come to see me, It's about just what you're saying, like the person not feeling like their partner is connecting or hearing their emotions. So when one person comes home and they've had a bad day and they try to talk to their partner about that, or if they're upset with something, the partner made a joke in front of other people when they were out and they were upset with what happened, that ability to kind of share your experience with your partner and say, hey, you know, this affected me, or I'm struggling with this, and for the person to be able to respond to that in a helpful way. So it's the idea of sort of kind of being able to express our emotions or being able to respond and help the other person with what they're struggling with or what they're feeling is probably the number one issue. And that can be changed. So you can have so much conflict and be at loggerheads and screaming arguments, but you can learn to get in touch with those emotions and learn to be able to sort of meet your partner's needs, even if you really struggle to do that. So there is hope for those people.
What's the hardest part about that process when you kind of obviously you've decided something needs to happen, because stuff like that is very relatable, certainly for us as well. Like, you know, so what's the first step to that? Because again, you can kind of go, right, I want to hear your problems, but you might not register them or kind of.
I think that it needs to be an emotional transformation. So I could just tell you, here's a few tips, and you know, it's not really going to change things substantially. You need to start to get in touch with emotions that maybe you haven't been in touch with for 10 or 20 years because you got brought up in a family where you didn't really sort of talk about feelings, or, you know, in the schoolyard, that was things that you just couldn't kind of express. So there needs to be an ability to start to connect with those underlying feelings. But that's what therapy does. It helps someone who's shut off certain emotions for years be able to connect with them, and it creates that transformation that's needed to then better connect with your partner and have a really happy relationship over your lifetime.
So would that be the key factor then to making the relationship last? I mean, is it communication, or is it kind of, I don't know.
Well, what is it? I don't know. I'm not the expert, that's for sure.
No, we're all looking for, because everything plays its part in a relationship. You know, like you said, there's ebbs and flows of everything. So it's kind of trying to focus on, right, well, what's the most important thing? Is it literally come down to communication?
It does. So that's a huge part. But the thing that's often overlooked with communication is the emotional aspect of it. Because in a sense, we all have a sufficient vocabulary. We can all speak. So the problem is not your inability to speak. It's that when you try to say something, you switch into, for example, from the primary emotions into things like anger. And then when you speak, you're speaking from that place of criticism or being, you know, sort of upset with them and telling them off. Or you switch into those emotions and then you pull away and you withdraw and you sort of shut off. So the communication is essential, but it's the emotions underneath the communication that needs to be changed, so that then the communication becomes more effective.
Sometimes you just want someone to listen. You don't need to fix everything, you know. And I think boys, sometimes the blokes can be really good at fixing things because they're like, well, you got a problem here, just fix it. I just want you to listen.
Yeah.
Just listen to me.
You need both. So, for example, like, you know, there are times...
I'm not just talking for me. I'm just going relatable.
But it's interesting. And it's the whole thing about, you know, I read this great article about a bloke he wrote a whole book about his wife leaving him because he left, he says, dishes in the sink. And then he went on this really interesting personal journey. It was like, it actually wasn't about the dishes in the sink. It was about a whole bunch of other stuff that was building up behind the dishes being the trigger. So it sounds really simple and really simplistic to kind of blame it all on that. But it was that his wife essentially felt that he wasn't paying any attention to her anymore, and that was a loss of love that she felt, and it was not just about the dishes.
So that's a great example. So take dishes, for example. It's building up. That might sort of make you feel like things are not being sort of evenly divided, or it's something that creates anxiety. You walk in the kitchen and you're someone that, you know, sort of feels calm when it's a clean space. So one thing is that you could go to your partner and go, you're a mess and you always leave everything in the kitchen and, you know, you've got to stop that. Or you could go to your partner and express something like, hey, I get really kind of overwhelmed and anxious when I walk in the kitchen and see all of that stuff. And it sort of feels hurtful that this is something that's important to me and that you don't listen to that and you don't try to sort of help me with that. And so it would mean so much to me if that's an area that you could make a bit of an effort in. And I'm, of course, happy to do something that is important to you, because I also want, you know, this relationship to work well. So if there's other areas that I can help you with, that's what I'd like to do.
Oh, great.
So something like that would change from that sort of criticism and, you know, making those broad statements about you never or so on.
So a good response to that would that be, let's get a dishwasher, babe, or something like that?
That's why we have a spare room. That's all great information. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you so
Ultimately,
much.
everyone wants a little bit of help. We all want to be
Yeah.
happy, or we all love the person we're with, and we just want to.
It's not getting into that negative cycle, right? Because you're not each
Exactly.
other's enemy. I'm
Yeah,
saying.
100%.
Ron, thanks so much for that. Really
My
appreciate
pleasure.
it.
Wish us
You're
luck.
welcome.
All
There we
right.
go.